Hey guys, my name is Soph, also known as Soph Active Life over on Instagram. This is my first vlog and I'm going to be talking about fat loss and my top tips for fat loss and cutting and how to set yourself up for your own cut. First of all, what is a cut? A cut is just reducing your body fat percentage, so wanting to lose fat, simple as that. Here are my top 13 tips for fat loss. So tip number 1 is setting your goals. You want to pick a time frame that you want to achieve your goals by. You might want to do the cut in more of an aggressive time period, for example 4 weeks, or you might want to do it in a longer, more sustainable way. For example, 12 weeks is a really good time. It also means if it's quite a long period of time, it's more sustainable, and that means that you're more likely to keep those results and not put the weight back on after being so aggressive. Also have a goal for what body fat percentage you might want to get down to. So you might want to get down to 15% from 20%, for example. That way you can work backwards and see how much percent you should be losing each week and ensure you're staying on track that way. Tip number 2, ensure you are in a caloric deficit. So being in a caloric deficit just means that you're burning more fat in a day than you're consuming with your food. So there are a few ways to do this. 1, eat in a caloric deficit, so you'll eat less food than you burn in a day. 2, you can increase your training volume to increase that deficit, so you might be doing more walking, more running, more weight training, more yoga, whatever it is you do, increasing that volume, so how many times per week or how long the period of training session is. That way it'll increase the deficit between your input, food, and output, training. The best way, in my opinion, is to do both of these things together. Increase your training volume slightly and decreasing the amount of food you're eating to ensure you're in that caloric deficit. Third tip is sleep. Sleep is super important, and I don't just mean your 8 hours of sleep at night. I mean your quality of sleep and your sleep routine. So making sure you're going to bed at the same time every night and waking up the same time every morning is a really good routine to get your body into, and it's actually really important. Also your quality of sleep during the night. So are you waking up to go to the bathroom? Are you kind of restless waking up? Are you finding it hard to fall asleep? And finally, when you wake up in the morning, are you waking up feeling refreshed, ready to take on the day? Or are you waking up feeling sluggish and tired and it takes like 5 alarms to get you up and going? If you answered yes to any of these things and your sleep is affected, that can affect your hormones ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is a hormone in your body that increases your appetite, and leptin is a hormone in your body that decreases appetite. So you can imagine if your sleep is out of whack and these hormones are out of whack, say you're only getting like 4 hours of sleep a night, your ghrelin levels can go up and your leptin levels can go down, meaning you're going to be feeling hungrier and less satiated by the food that you're eating. So you're going to be eating more food and you won't be in your deficit anymore, and you cannot lose fat if you're not eating in a deficit. Poor sleep and cortisol, the stress hormone, also go hand in hand, and that brings me to my next point, which is tip number 4, stress. What you want is to wake up in the morning with elevated levels of cortisol. So your body should naturally be waking up in the morning, which is a cortisol response, and then tapering down throughout the day so that you get into a sleepy headspace before going to bed and having a good sleep, and that cycle just kind of continues. One thing to note, if you are a highly stressed person, it's actually quite beneficial to do your workouts in the morning, because if you're training at night and you elevate your cortisol levels before going to sleep, then it's just going to put you in a bad cycle. It'll be harder to get to sleep, and then the cycle kind of repeats. Stress also impacts your insulin sensitivity. So we want our bodies to be insulin sensitive. This is a topic I'm going to go into later. Basically, to try and reduce your insulin resistance, you can do things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, reading, just to try and balance those levels out and de-stress your life. Tip number 5, track your results. Before starting your cut, I would get your body fat done. So whether that's guesstimating it with pictures, whether it's getting calipers, so your skin folds, so getting your fat pinched, which is fun. You can get DEXA scans, in-body scans. There's a few different ways to do it. You can also do your weight, tape measurements. Photos are actually super important. You can often feel like you're not really making progress, and a photo will
say so much. Obviously you see your body every day, it's hard to see the little changes that occur, so photos and how clothes fit are really good indicators of how you're tracking with your fat loss progress. Tip number 6, know your body type. So the somatic body types, there are 3 types. There is the ectomorph, mesomorph and endomorph. Ectomorphs have naturally high metabolic rates. They're quite skinny without needing to exercise or eat less for fat loss, and they do struggle to put on lean muscle mass and do find it quite easy to reduce body fat. Mesomorphs are naturally quite lean, muscular and strong. Female mesomorphs tend to have defined hourglass figures with wider shoulders than hips, and they do find it easy to transition between different training and nutrition protocols. Endomorphs tend to have slow metabolisms. It's quite easy for them to gain weight, and it is hard to lose weight. Tip number 7, calculating your calories. What you want to do to calculate your calories and ensure you're in a calorie deficit is figure out your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure. Total daily energy expenditure is your baseline calories. So that's where you sit, where if you're eating this amount of calories, you're not going to gain weight, you're not going to lose weight. So from there, you figure out your deficit, so how much to take out of that calorie-wise, and then you'll be eating in a deficit and you can lose fat. So your TDEE is made up of your BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate, times by your PAL, which is your physical activity level. Your BMR is the amount of calories you burn just by living, like just by existing, breathing, day-to-day, living. And your PAL is your physical activity level. You could be an office worker that drives to work, sits at work all day, drives home. You would have a low activity level. Or you could be an office worker that walks to work, does a lot of walking throughout the day and trains in a day, so you would have a higher physical activity level. And then there are professions like PTs, people that are on their feet a lot, moving weights, lifting things, that would have higher activity levels because that's required in their day-to-day job. There are many different formulas people like to use to calculate their TDEE. A formula I like to use is the Catch-McArdle formula. The link will be down in the description if you guys just want to click on that. All you need to know is your body fat percentage and your weight. If you don't know your body fat percentage, you can just guess through images. There's another link below in the description, and you can just kind of base that off how you look compared to the pictures. Number 8, figuring out your caloric deficit. So once you have your TDEE calculated, you need to figure out what percentage of deficit you want to go into. So again, this reflects back to your goals. Do you want to do an aggressive cut, or do you, across a shorter period of time, or do you want to do a longer term sustainable approach? That's the one I recommend. And from there, you can figure out your macronutrients. For females with a body fat percentage of around 20%, I would decrease your TDEE calories by 20% to get your deficit. Females with 25% body fat, I would go into a 25% caloric deficit. Females with 30% body fat, I would go into a 30% caloric deficit. You can see where this is going. Females with a 35% body fat would go into a 35% deficit, and then females with a 36% body fat percentage and above, I would just put on 1200 calories. Okay, number 9, figuring out your macros. Macronutrient is just a type of food containing proteins, carbs and fats, all the essential things we need as humans to be eating to live. These are broken into a bunch of different foods. You can find on Google a list of foods that fall into these categories. Some examples: fats would be, your olive oils, your coconut oils, avocado, nut butters, nuts. Proteins are things like, fish, chicken, red meat, protein powder, eggs. And then you've got your carbs, which are things like sweet potato, vegetables, rice, pumpkin, pastas. There's a lot of different macro splits that are going to work differently for everyone, but here are some rough guidelines that I like to use when figuring out my clients' macronutrient splits. Typically, if you have a higher percentage of body fat, I would tend to put them on a lower carb plan. So an example of a lower carb plan split, a lower carb split, which is higher in protein, higher in fat, lower in carbs, would be 25% carbs, 30% protein, and 45% fat. If you're someone that's already quite lean and you're just wanting to lose a bit of body fat percentage, you could do a moderate carb plan, which would be really good for maintaining your lean muscle mass but still giving you the ability to lose some fat. So an example macro split would be 35% carbs, 30% protein, and 35% fats. Finally, for people that maybe have some hormonal issues, a really good split is an isocaloric split. So that is an even split across your proteins, fats, and carbs across every meal. So you would have 40% carbs, 30% protein, and 30% fat. Just ensure you're being adaptive to these macros. You might be the kind of person that operates really well on carbs. You might be someone that operates really well on higher fats. It just depends how your body responds. For example, if you're feeling quite sluggish and low energy, you might want to increase the carbs and see how your body responds. Or if you're just not really seeing the results, you might want to reduce the carbs by a bit. So just be really monitoring how your body is responding to the macro split and have a play with that. Tip number 10, refeed days. A refeed day is when you bring yourself out of the deficit back to your baseline or even a small surplus in your calories. So if you're eating at, say, 1600 calories and your baseline is 2000 calories, you'd increase that by 400 calories to get back up to 2000 calories for around 2 to 3 days. And you would increase the carbohydrate, typically macronutrient component of your diet. Why a refeed? Refeed days are really good at resetting your hormones and your metabolic rate. So when you might feel it's time to do a refeed, try and push it out as much as you can. But if you're feeling super lethargic, low energy, you're kind of struggling to stay on track with your diet, your compliance and motivation is kind of slipping after at least the first 2 weeks of doing your deficit, that would be an indication that you need to do a refeed day. Refeed days allow you to get really great long-term sustainable results without experiencing the negative side of a deficit can have on your body. Note, a refeed day is not a cheat day. So it's still, when I do a refeed day, I increase my calories and my carbs. So I'll be eating things like rice and sweet potato to make up for that carb component. I'm not going to be eating processed foods that I know hinder my results, like pizzas and pastas. Tip number 11. That's really awkward. NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This is basically the things that you do outside of exercise. It'll be things like getting up and moving, how many times, fidgeting, getting up and going to the bathroom, just little bits of energy production that you're doing in your everyday life. Ways that you can increase your NEAT, for example, would be walking to work, going for a walk in your lunch break, going and doing the fire escape stairs every hour if you're sitting at a desk is a really good way to incrementally build up how many steps you get in a day and how much energy you're burning over time in a day. And it's actually a really good secret weapon for speeding up your fat loss process. Tip number 12, recovery. Super important, something a lot of people neglect because they think, I'm in a fat loss phase, I should be going really hard at the gym, there's no stopping, no time for rest. Wrong. Your body needs time to recover. Just like sleep and stress, you really need to prioritize your recovery. Allow your muscles time to recover from whatever training you might be doing. And obviously you're eating in a deficit, it is going to be taking a toll on your body. So just be really smart with, taking days off where you need. Tip number 13. Yep, I got that right. Compliance. Compliance is probably the number one most important thing in any training process, whether it's fat loss, muscle build, training for a comp, whatever. If you don't stick to your nutrition and your training protocols, you're just not going to see the results. You can't expect to do something half-hearted and see the result. It's just not realistic. All the tips that I've mentioned earlier, just nail those and you will see results. Okay guys, that's it for my fat loss tips. Hopefully you can put these into practice and see some amazing results. And if you do, make sure you tag me on Instagram or here. Any comments or questions you guys have, write them below and I'll be responding to those. So, thank you.